Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When a reclusive ex-investigator receives a mysterious eviction notice from a homeowners association he's never joined, he uncovers a ruthless conspiracy of fraud, arson, and corporate land grabs. They picked the wrong man to push off his land. Now he's fighting back, by the law or beyond it. It was a Sunday morning, one of those rare quiet ones where the sky looked like it had finally remembered how to be blue. I was elbow deep in grease, tuning the old Evinrude outboard motor in my workshop, country radio humming low in the background. Bo, my mutt of questionable lineage and unquestionable loyalty, was lying by the door gnawing a bone, peaceful, almost suspiciously so. Then he started barking, not the usual lazy someone's jogging by bark. No, this was the deep, full-throated growl that said get your ass up and bring a flashlight or a shotgun, maybe both. I wiped my hands on a rag and stepped out of the shop. Bo was already halfway up the gravel path toward the gate. Fur bristled. I followed, still half expecting it to be a deer or maybe a kid selling magazines. What I found was a sealed waterproof envelope zip-tied to my front gate. It was white, official-looking, thick, too thick for comfort. Embossed on the front in gold lettering was a logo I recognized instantly, Whispering Pines Homeowners Association. That was rich. I lived next to Whispering Pines, sure. My 3.5-acre property shared a boundary with the back end of their meticulously beige subdivision, but I wasn't part of their fussy uniform hellscape. Never had been. Never signed a damn thing. Still, I opened the envelope. Inside were 3 stapled documents, neatly formatted, complete with a signature line that looked like someone had really practiced forging it. At the top, bold and centered, notice of violation and immediate reassignment of property per HOA Charter Section 11. I stood there in the morning sun, grease still under my fingernails, reading words that made less sense the longer I looked at them. According to this stack of bureaucratic fantasy, I had committed multiple ongoing violations, including, but not limited to, inconsistent facade aesthetics, vehicle obstruction of shared viewways, and inappropriate recreational storage. I had to reread that one twice before realizing they meant my boat. The document then stated I had until 8 p.m. that same day to vacate the premises voluntarily, as the HOA was preparing for reassignment and new occupancy. 8 p.m. 14 hours. They were evicting me from my own damn house. I laughed out loud, the kind of laugh you bark when something is too stupid to be real but too well typed to be fake. Then I looked up. That's when I noticed the first camera. It was bolted to the pine tree just outside my fence line, angled directly at my porch. Black casing, blinking light. Not mine. Another one was affixed to the corner of the HOA's decorative concrete wall, aimed square at my driveway. I squinted toward the subdivision road and spotted a third, disguised as a birdhouse. Classy. Then I heard tires crunching gravel behind me. A white SUV rolled into view, idle humming low, big vinyl logo on the side, Whispering Pines HOA. It parked just across the property line. 2 men got out, khakis and high-visibility vests that looked like they'd never seen a day of real work. One held a tablet and started taking pictures of my fence. The other just nodded at me, expressionless, and walked along the property line, snapping shots of the house from every angle. I called out, "Can I help you gentlemen with something?" The one with the camera smiled. "Just documenting violations for the record, sir. Nothing to worry about if you comply." Comply with what? I held up the letter. This nonsense. I'm not even in your HOA. Not according to the updated zoning records, he said, like he'd rehearsed that line in front of a mirror. Bo growled again, low and mean. I gave the leash a little tug. "Unless you've got a warrant or an actual badge," I said, "you're trespassing. You've got 30 seconds to be on the other side of that easement, or we're going to have a bigger problem than mismatched siding." The second guy lifted his vest to reveal a laminated card clipped to his belt. "Security Compliance Officer," it said, like that meant anything to anyone outside of a cubicle. They didn't move. I took out my phone and started recording. That did the trick. They backed off slowly, pretending to check something on the tablet. Then they returned to the SUV and drove off without another word. I turned to Bo. "What the hell is this circus?" Bo wagged his tail once, then went back to sniffing where one of the men had stood. I went back inside, poured a shot of the good bourbon even though it wasn't noon yet, and sat at the kitchen table staring at the envelope like it might grow legs and walk itself into the trash. It didn't. Instead, I picked up the land deed from my lockbox, dusted it off, and read every line like I was prepping for a trial. My property was clear. No easements, no encumbrances, no HOA affiliation. Not now, not ever. This land was mine. Bought it 6 years ago at auction, restored every inch with my own damn hands. And now a bunch of vinyl-clad Stepford agents thought they could rewrite history and throw me out. Not happening. I scanned the letter again and underlined the kicker. Failure to comply may result in enforcement action under Administrative Code Section 7, including but not limited to forced access and transfer of occupancy. I didn't know what Administrative Code Section 7 was. But I knew this much. They'd just declared war, and I don't lose wars. By Monday morning, I'd moved past confusion and straight into pissed-off procedural mode. My years as an investigator for the DA's office had left me with a few handy habits, chief among them, never assume incompetence when corruption is a possibility. That fake eviction notice wasn't some HOA volunteer going rogue. It had structure, language, formatting. Someone was playing this smart, or at least thought they were. So I took a drive. First stop, Carroll County Recorder's Office. Walked in wearing my old leather jacket and my "Don't ask me for help, I'm retired" hat. The clerk behind the desk looked about 19 and deeply underpaid. Need the parcel history and zoning boundary info for lot number 17-Alpha on Route 12, I said. He typed it in, then frowned at the screen. Huh. I hate when clerks say, huh. Problem? Depends. You want the most recent zoning overlay or the legacy map? I leaned forward. Both. He printed them off. On the legacy map, dated 5 years ago, my property sat blissfully outside the bold red line marking Whispering Pines' HOA jurisdiction, just like it always had. But the newer overlay, dated 15 months ago, showed something different. There it was. My land, my house, my trees, and boat and workshop, all now swallowed up by a digitally drawn curve. A single line extending the HOA boundary to encompass my property, like someone had just clicked and dragged me into Stepford. No record of annexation hearings. The clerk muttered, scrolling. That's odd. Give me the file anyway, I said, and anything with my signature. An hour later, I was holding a stapled copy of what someone claimed was an annexation agreement, dated 3 years ago, allegedly signed by yours truly. According to the document, I had voluntarily applied for inclusion into the Whispering Pines HOA to benefit from the protective aesthetic and security guidelines afforded by the Chartered Association. Protective aesthetic, my ass. The signature at the bottom looked like someone had traced my name from a DMV form with their left hand. The notary stamp belonged to a woman who, as I later confirmed online, had died 2 years ago. That's a hell of a trick. Getting notarized from beyond the grave. I stood in the parking lot staring at the document, wind flapping it against my hand. Whoever did this wasn't just overstepping. This was fraud. Real fraud with criminal implications. Someone forged my signature, doctored zoning overlays, and filed them with the county recorder, and it had worked. On paper, anyway. That's why the HOA jackals thought they had legal standing. Time to bring in backup. I called Julia Reyes, real estate attorney and the meanest legal pit bull in the Tri-County area. I'd worked cases with her years ago when she was still green. Now she had her own firm, a reputation for dismantling dirty developers, and a coffee addiction that rivaled mine. I met her that afternoon at her office. She read the annexation agreement with her mouth half open, then flipped through the zoning maps, checking timestamps and watermarks like she was reviewing evidence in a murder case. This is not just sloppy, she said. It's orchestrated. They submitted this through a fast-track recorder program, normally only used for high-volume developer filings. You don't qualify unless you're... Oh, what? She swiveled her monitor to show me a filing log from the county's document portal. Right above my fake annexation was a bulk submission batch by a company called Brindlehawk Development LLC. I raised an eyebrow. They sound friendly. Julia nodded slowly. They're not. I've run into them before. Subdivision expansion out of Atlanta. They build, flip, and vanish. And guess who's listed as project manager for Whispering Pines Phase 3? She clicked. Up popped a name I already hated, Karen Pryor. Of course. So this wasn't just about some HOA president with a power complex. This was business, money, expansion, and my land. My beautiful, isolated, paid-for land sat right between Phase 2 and Phase 3 like a stubborn molar the dentist couldn't wait to yank. I was the gap in their master plan. Julia printed everything. Here's what we do. First, I'm filing a formal title discrepancy challenge with the county. Second, we serve Whispering Pines HOA with a cease and desist. Third, we send a preservation of evidence notice to Brindlehawk. And we don't say another damn word until we see how they react. I nodded, mind already spinning. As I was leaving, she called out, "Trevor, this isn't just harassment. This is organized fraud. You picked the right fight." Back at home, Bo greeted me like I'd been gone for a week, not 4 hours. I scratched behind his ears and told him we had trouble. That night, as I took a walk around the property, flashlight in hand, I spotted a new camera, low to the ground this time, hidden in the brush near my boat trailer. I followed the wire back to a half-buried black box, maybe 6 inches long, unmarked, untethered, battery-powered. Someone had physically crossed onto my land and planted surveillance equipment. I didn't touch it, just snapped photos from every angle, logged the GPS coordinates, and sent it all to Julia. Then I walked back inside, locked every door, and poured myself 2 fingers of something expensive. They wanted to claim my land. Let them try, but they'd better bring more than fake signatures and HOA stickers next time. The knock came early, just after sunrise, sharp and deliberate, like whoever was on the other side already knew I was awake. Bo was at the door before I was. Hackles up, low growl vibrating through his chest. I didn't bother asking who it was. I already had a pretty good idea. When I opened the door, 3 people stood on my porch like they were posing for a brochure titled How to Trespass Legally. 2 men and a woman, all wearing matching polo shirts with the Whispering Pines HOA logo stitched where a conscience should have been. One had a clipboard, one had a tablet, and the third had a small cardboard box with a shiny new padlock sitting on top. "Mr. Abbott's," the woman said, voice syrupy and loud, like she expected an audience. "We're here to begin administrative compliance procedures." I looked at the box, then at the padlock, then back at her. "You planning to lock my dog out or just start with the house?" The man with the tablet stepped forward. "Sir, under revised zoning authority and HOA Charter Section 11.2, your continued occupancy is unauthorized pending resolution of violations." I smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. "You're on private property," I said. "You have exactly 10 seconds to leave before I call the sheriff." Clipboard guy cleared his throat. "We're authorized to be here. We have documentation." "Fantastic," I said. "So do I." Mine's signed by the state of Georgia and doesn't include forged signatures or dead notaries. That's when tablet guy moved past me, like he was late for a dentist appointment, and reached toward the front door handle. I didn't shove him. I didn't grab him. I simply stepped into his path and let him walk into me. "Bad move," I said quietly. He froze. I pulled my phone out and hit record. "This is Trevor Abbott's property owner. 3 individuals claiming HOA authority are attempting unlawful access to my residence." Clipboard guy muttered something under his breath. The woman's smile cracked. "We'll document your non-compliance," she snapped. "Do that," I said. From the road. They didn't leave. Instead, Clipboard guy walked toward the gate and slapped a laminated sign onto the fence with zip ties. "Property of Whispering Pines, HOA. Reassignment in progress." That's when I called the sheriff. Deputy David Lowell arrived 20 minutes later, cruiser crunching down my gravel drive like an old friend. He stepped out, hand resting casually on his belt, eyes already scanning the scene. "What's going on, Trevor?" he asked. "These people are trying to take my house," I said. "Again." The woman launched into a rehearsed speech about annexation, violations, administrative authority. Deputy Lowell listened politely, then turned to me. "You got your deed?" I handed it to him, original, recorded, clean. He read it once, then again, then looked at them. "You folks have anything signed by this man?" Tablet guy held up his device. "It's in the system." Deputy Lowell's jaw tightened. "The system doesn't override a recorded deed. You're trespassing." Clipboard guy puffed up. "We're acting under HOA enforcement." "No," Lowell said, voice flat. "You're acting under a misunderstanding at best and criminal trespass at worst." Tablet guy took a step back. The woman started talking fast, something about legal counsel and escalation. Lowell wasn't impressed. "I am documenting this as attempted unlawful entry and self-help enforcement," he said. You will leave now. One of them argued. The argument lasted about 3 seconds before Lowell cuffed him and walked him to the cruiser. The other two watched in stunned silence as the door slammed shut. After they left, Lowell looked at me. You need to file formal complaints. This is getting ugly. Oh, I plan to, I said. It didn't stop there. 2 days later, I got a notice taped to my mailbox from the county fire marshal's office. Anonymous complaint. Allegation of unsafe fuel storage, excessive flammable materials, and unpermitted electrical work in an accessory structure. I laughed so hard Bo thought it was playtime. The inspector showed up that afternoon. Nice guy. Thorough. Checked everything. My workshop passed with flying colors, fuel stored properly, wiring up to code. He apologized for the inconvenience and left. The next morning, another notice. Code enforcement this time. Noise complaints. Commercial activity allegations. Someone claimed I was running a boat repair business out of my home. I wasn't. By the end of the week, Julia called me. Every complaint came from the same IP address, HOA office network. I stood on my porch, staring at the trees, the cameras I'd found still fresh in my mind. They weren't trying to win. They were trying to exhaust me. That was a mistake. By the time the third bogus complaint hit my mailbox, I stopped being angry and started being methodical. Anger clouds judgment. Methodical gets results. I spread everything out across my dining table like evidence in a cold case. Letters, screenshots, zoning maps, timestamps, IP logs Julia had pulled, photographs of the hidden cameras. It wasn't chaos anymore, it was a pattern. Julia came over that afternoon with a banker's box and the kind of look that meant she'd found something she wished she hadn't. "You're not alone," she said, dropping the box onto the table. "Not even close." Inside were files on other properties, addresses I recognized, a few I didn't, all independent parcels bordering Whispering Pines or sitting inconveniently between phases of development. Same story, different victims, sudden HOA. Inclusion, forged annexation agreements, dead notaries, accelerated zoning updates filed in bulk. "They're cherry-picking land," I said. She nodded. "Brindlehawk is using the HOA as a legal battering ram. Karen handles the dirty work. Paper, pressure, intimidation. They get the land folded in, then magically reclassified as future community assets." One of the files belonged to a retired couple 2 miles east of me. Their property had been flagged for non-conforming vegetation until they sold under threat of foreclosure. Another was a man who died before the annexation document was supposedly signed. I leaned back in my chair. "She's not just power-hungry. She's on commission." Julia didn't smile. "Worse, there are payment transfers. Not huge at first, but consistent. Personal account labeled consulting." That night, I couldn't sleep. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you listen for things you can't hear yet. Around 2 in the morning, Bo started pacing. Not barking, just moving from window to window. I checked the cameras. At first, nothing. Then, at the far edge of the property, near the old utility shed I hadn't bothered fixing yet, a flicker of movement. Someone crouched low, hood up, face hidden. They moved fast, purposeful. I grabbed my phone and kept recording. The figure paused, bent down. Then there was a brief flash, small, sharp, and the person retreated into the trees. I was already pulling on boots when the smell hit. Smoke. By the time I got there, flames were licking up the side of the shed, chewing through dry wood like it had been starving. I used the hose, then the extinguisher from the truck, and finally dirt and sheer stubbornness. The fire died, but not before leaving black scars and a hole burned straight through the siding. Fire department showed up 10 minutes later, sheriff right behind them. "Electrical?" one of the firefighters asked. "No," I said. "Arson." Karen wasted no time. By morning, she'd posted in the Whispering Pines community forum. Screenshots started coming in from neighbors I barely knew. We warned the county about him. Unsafe storage. This is what happens when people refuse HOA safety standards. She was building a narrative. Dangerous loner, reckless landowner, fire hazard. Except she forgot something. My cameras don't miss much. I pulled the footage frame by frame. The person's face was hidden, but the car wasn't. A white pickup, rear quarter panel dented, custom rims with a chipped spoke. I'd seen it before, parked behind the Brindlehawk field office during one of my earlier drives. I zoomed in on the plate. Partial match. Julia didn't even pretend to be surprised when I sent her the video. "That's their contractor vehicle," she said. "Registered under a Shell's subsidiary. So Karen tried to burn me out, I said. She tried to make you look unstable enough that the county would step in. I stood in the yard, staring at the charred remains of the shed, the smell still clinging to the air. She hadn't just crossed a line. She'd sprinted past it with gasoline in her hand. And now I had proof. The morning after the fire, I drove straight to the sheriff's office with the footage. No phone calls, no emails, no waiting. I wanted them to see it with their own eyes, on my device, without the chance for someone to misplace anything. Sheriff Wallace didn't need much convincing. He watched the video in silence, pausing to zoom in on the license plate, then again on the moment the figure lit something and tossed it toward the shed. "I know that truck," he said flatly. "Saw it parked behind the Brindlehawk site off Old Ridge Road. Belongs to their foreman. Goes by Reggie something. I'll run it." By that afternoon, the fire was officially classified as arson. Julia filed an injunction and emergency preservation order against both Whispering Pines HOA and Brindlehawk. No more document shredding, no deleted emails, no disappearing into the corporate mist. The dominoes started falling almost immediately. First, one of the HOA board members, Tim, a guy I'd seen driving around the subdivision in a golf cart like it was a tank, lawyered up and filed for limited immunity. His attorney reached out to Julia directly, offering limited cooperation in exchange for being left out of a civil suit. The guy was nervous, said he had recordings from board meetings and access to internal communications between Karen and Brindlehawk. He gave us one email that was pure gold. Subject line: Annexation Targets Q3. Attached was a spreadsheet listing property IDs, including mine, marked as in progress with comments like Karen handling deed update and developer bonus once annexation is complete. That was the moment. Julia smiled for real. Then came the audit. Apparently, one of the county zoning clerks, fresh out of grad school and still idealistic, flagged the same annexation paperwork we'd been questioning. She brought it to her supervisor, who kicked it up to the county commissioner's office. Within 48 hours, an internal investigation had begun. Karen, to her credit, tried to control the damage. She scheduled a community meeting at the Whispering Pines clubhouse, ostensibly to reassure residents and combat misinformation. It was live-streamed. I watched with a bourbon in one hand and Bo snoring at my feet. She stood behind a podium like she was giving a TED Talk. Hair done up, HOA pin gleaming, smiled just wide enough to hide the panic. She denied everything, of course. Blamed a campaign of harassment by a disgruntled property owner with a grudge. Called me a known instigator. Bad move, because midway through her performance, one of the residents, sweet old Mrs. Dalton, who'd lived in Whispering Pines since the paint dried, stood up and asked, "Then why is your name on these checks?" And she held up printed screenshots of bank statements that had just started circulating on the neighborhood Facebook group. Brindlehawk to K. Pryor, $2,500. Brindlehawk to K. Pryor, $4,000. Brindlehawk LLC to K. Pryor, $7,200. Memo: Phase 3 Advisory. The room went quiet. Karen's smile cracked for the second time since I met her. The fallout was immediate. The sheriff's office served a warrant on her home that evening. They seized her phone, her laptop, and a desktop computer from the HOA office. Julie and I got a call that night from the county prosecutor who, after months of ignoring us, suddenly wanted to coordinate statements. Funny how fast people get motivated when the press gets involved. Because by then, the local news had picked up the story. Headline: HOA president under investigation for fraud, arson, and land grab scheme. It wasn't just me anymore. Other homeowners started speaking out. People who'd been bullied into selling, intimidated with fines, or told they were mistaken about their property lines. Some had moved out years ago. Others still lived nearby and were ready to raise hell. The best part, one of the Brindlehawk Jr. developers flipped. Turns out he'd been recording meetings for legal protection, and when the heat hit, he decided to trade everything he had in exchange for immunity. Video, audio, internal memos, all of it. One clip showed Karen saying, and I quote, "If we can squeeze out that one stubborn holdout, the rest falls like dominoes. The county won't care, and by the time anyone sues, we'll be sold and gone." She was talking about me. Julie and I met with the assistant DA the next morning. She looked like she hadn't slept in a week. We handed over everything: video footage, fake signatures, zoning overlays, internal emails, financial records. She just shook her head. "This is bigger than HOA fraud. This is organized real estate corruption. Karen Pryor is about to go from HOA president to federal witness or federal defendant. Maybe both. The next day, Karen's attorney announced she was cooperating fully with authorities, which, in lawyer speak, meant she'd flipped. She gave up everything. The kickbacks, the names, the chain of emails, the staged violations. Even the guy who lit my shed on fire, Reggie Harris, former Brindlehawk site foreman who, according to her, acted on his own. Sure he did. It was all finally out in the open. But something told me this was only the beginning. It took less than 2 weeks for the case to go federal. By that point, Karen Pryor was no longer giving statements. She was under house arrest, bracelet on her ankle, her once pristine white SUV now parked behind drawn blinds. Whispering Pines, HOA had gone into full lockdown mode. Emails bounced, phones rang to voicemail, and the clubhouse community board had been stripped of every flyer except one. Emergency meeting, HOA board dissolution vote, residents only. I wasn't invited, of course. Didn't need to be, because while they scrambled to rewrite their reality, the U.S. Attorney's Office stepped in. Brindlehawk's interstate land sales, their shell LLCs, the money laundering trail Julia had helped untangle, it all hit the threshold for federal real estate wire fraud, conspiracy, and racketeering. Racketeering. That was a word I hadn't heard outside courtrooms and old mob cases. Suddenly, it wasn't just me and a few neighbors with complaints. It was the Department of Justice. It was investigators in suits pulling records, raiding Brindlehawk's local field office, and hauling out computers like they were seizing evidence from a drug ring. It felt surreal, watching it all unfold from my porch. Bo barked every time another unmarked sedan rolled down the cul-de-sac behind my property, heading for Whispering Pines. I stopped trying to count after the 6th black Escalade. Brindlehawk's public relations team released a statement the next day, calling the investigation an overreach and a misunderstanding stemming from local zoning disputes. No mention of forged documents. No explanation for the 7-digit transfers to personal accounts of HOA board members. But the courtroom doesn't care about spin. And I was going to testify. Julia prepped me like we were going to war. She cross-referenced every document, prepped exhibits, made me rehearse answers to potential attacks on my credibility. You were in law enforcement, she said. That's a double-edged sword. They'll paint you as vengeful or biased. I'm neither, I said. I'm just tired of being screwed with. She smiled. Good. Let them see that. Court started on a Wednesday. The federal courthouse in Atlanta was colder than I remembered, all steel and glass and voices that echoed in corners. Karen sat across the aisle, flanked by 2 attorneys, her face pale but stoic. She didn't look at me once. Brindlehawk's legal team, 3 men in tailored suits who looked like they charged by the breath, tried to stall, obfuscate, delay, but the evidence was too much. We had forged annexation documents submitted through fast-track recording programs, video footage of arson by a Brindlehawk contractor, emails between Karen and Brindlehawk executives discussing land grabs and compliance incentives, audio recordings from internal HOA meetings discussing property targeting, bank records showing transfers to Karen's personal account with memos like phase integration bonus. One moment stuck with me. A Brindlehawk executive, under oath, was shown a printout of a group email thread labeled high-value acquisitions outside HOA. He blinked, sweated, and admitted that yes, my property and 5 others were anticipated absorption zones slated for voluntary compliance or strategic intervention. The courtroom was silent. When I took the stand, I told the truth. Told them how I bought the property fair and legal at a bankruptcy auction, how I restored it myself, how I had never signed anything tying me to any HOA, how one morning I found a fake eviction notice nailed to my gate and cameras pointed at my bedroom windows. I told them about the scare tactics, the false complaints, the men in polo shirts who tried to change my locks, the fire. And I told them how it wasn't just about me, how this whole thing was bigger than one house or one stubborn landowner. It was about the idea that private corporations and petty tyrants in name tags thought they could steamroll people if they wrapped it in enough paperwork. I saw a few jurors nod. Karen didn't show much emotion during the trial, but when Julia played the video of her bragging to the HOA board, "We'll get him out one way or another," her hand visibly shook. Her lawyer leaned in to whisper something, but it was too late. The prosecution rested on a mountain of evidence. The defense had character witnesses. One claimed Karen was deeply committed to neighborhood harmony. Another said she had a strong sense of community. It was like calling a dictator passionate about civic engagement. Closing arguments came on a Monday. The jury was out less than 24 hours. Guilty on all counts. Karen was convicted of conspiracy to commit real estate fraud, forgery and falsification of legal documents, criminal trespassing and unlawful property enforcement, attempted property seizure by deception, accessory to arson, racketeering. Under federal statute, sentencing came 2 weeks later, 14 years. No parole for the first 10. She didn't cry. Not then. Just stood there, hands clenched in front of her, as the judge read the list of crimes like a grocery list of everything she'd never do again. Brindlehawk fared no better. The court ordered full financial restitution to victims, forced dissolution of multiple shell LLCs, asset seizure of corporate holdings tied to fraudulent annexations, revocation of their development licenses across 3 states. And the cherry on top? The Whispering Pines HOA was legally disbanded by court order, its board stripped of authority, all active enforcement suspended, every fake annexation voided. Some residents cheered, some looked scared, like kids watching a parent get handcuffed. But most were just relieved. The system had finally worked, and for once it worked for the little guy. Victory doesn't feel like fireworks, it feels like silence. The kind that hits you 3 days after the sentencing, when the adrenaline dries up and there's no one left to fight. No more subpoenas, no more strangers filming your property, no more HOA trucks cruising slow past your fence like they're casing a target. Just silence. The morning after the ruling, I stepped out onto my porch with Bo, mug of coffee in hand, and for the first time in months, no one was watching us. No new cameras, no strange SUVs, just birds, the creak of the old porch swing, and Bo sniffing the breeze like he'd finally gotten his yard back. I'd won. Legally, financially, publicly, we'd buried them. Karen behind bars. Brindlehawk gutted. Whispering Pines HOA dissolved by federal decree. My name was cleared, my land was protected, but victory comes with a bill. The fire damage to my workshop had been minor, but not trivial. The insurance company dragged their feet for weeks, some vague clause about liability pending ongoing litigation. Julia eventually got them in line, but it took 3 months before the repairs even started. I replaced the burned siding myself. I wanted to feel it, every nail, every board, wanted to remind the place, and maybe myself, that this land still belonged to me because I'd earned it. And I wasn't the only one rebuilding. Across the county, other landowners came forward. Some had quietly accepted the HOA's threats. Others had sold at a loss, shamed into compliance. Now they were filing suits of their own, emboldened by the press, the verdict, and the sudden cultural shift in how people saw these manicured little empires with power complexes. Turns out, I'd opened a floodgate. Julia helped draft a coalition complaint, 15 plaintiffs from across 3 neighborhoods, all with eerily similar stories. We had the momentum, and we weren't wasting it. She called it the Anti-Anshian Initiative. I called it Justice with a Vengeance. At the same time, the county commissioners launched a task force to review zoning fast-track abuse. That alone stirred up a hornet's nest of developers scrambling to review past filings before someone else did it for them. One zoning clerk quit on the spot. Another turned whistleblower. Things got loud again. But this time, it wasn't against me. People from town started showing up unannounced, not in the creepy HOA way, but the neighborly way. One guy brought me pie. Another dropped off a spare chainsaw. Some woman I didn't even know asked if I'd speak at a town hall meeting about property rights and rural sovereignty. I declined. I'm not a politician. I'm a man who just wanted to be left the hell alone. Still, I found myself helping. Quietly. I reviewed property lines, helped draft a few affidavits, pointed one woman to a good real estate litigator when her HOA found a stormwater easement that mysteriously didn't exist until her husband died. Bo liked the attention, me not so much. But then came the price I hadn't counted on. One night I got a letter, no return address. Inside, a single piece of paper with 3 typed lines. You cost good people their jobs. Developers bring growth. Watch your back, old man. No signature. Just like that, the war came back in miniature. Julia handed the letter to federal agents who were still crawling through Brindlehawk's digital trash. They took it seriously, ran prints, scanned the paper, added it to the case file, but nothing concrete turned up. No arrests. Just another reminder that some people don't need a uniform or a title to become dangerous. I started caring again. Not paranoia, muscle memory. I'd been threatened before. Never by a corporation wearing a friendly face and handing out HOA newsletters. But a threat is a threat. Bo got a new collar with a GPS tag. I reinforced the fence on the north side. Quiet changes. I didn't tell anyone about the second letter. It came 2 weeks later. Same typewriter, different tone. Your land won't save you forever. We build around problems, or under them. Everyone sells eventually. This time, there was a symbol drawn on the bottom corner. A simple triangle with a black dot in the center. Julia didn't recognize it. Neither did the feds. But I did. I'd seen it spray painted on a fence during a Brindlehawk development years ago, back when I was still a county investigator. Back then, it was just local graffiti, some construction crew mark maybe, or an internal tag. Now it felt like a signature, a message. But from who? Karen was locked up. Brindlehawk had been gutted, but corporations have hydra heads. You kill one project, 2 more grow in the next zip code. Maybe this wasn't over. Maybe it never really would be. That night, I stood in the backyard by the old flagpole looking out over the trees. The wind was cold, but clear. A good kind of cold. The kind that wakes you up, keeps you sharp. Bo sat at my feet, alert. I tightened the lock on the back gate and turned off the porch light. Let them come. I was still here, and this land still wasn't for sale. 3 months later, I planted a sign on the front fence. Not the kind you buy at the hardware store. I made it myself. Steel plate, powder-coated black, bold white lettering. It read, "Not for sale, not HO, not afraid." It wasn't for them. It was for me. A declaration, a reminder. The land was quiet again, not the uneasy silence from before, but the kind you earn after surviving something that tried to break you. The kind that wraps around you like an old coat. Worn, patched, but dependable. Winter came early that year. Cold mornings with steam rising from the pasture. Bo's fur thickened, and he took to napping on the porch again like nothing had ever happened. The shed was rebuilt better than before. I added an external breaker box, security lighting, and another camera, pointed straight at the north woods just in case. The triangle symbol hadn't reappeared. Neither had any more letters. Maybe they got the message. Maybe the new round of indictments scared the next would-be developer off. Or maybe the shadows had simply pulled back, regrouping for some other subdivision in some other state, where the land was a little cheaper and the neighbors a little more timid. But not here. Here, people remembered. Whispering Pines was a ghost. Without an HOA, the place had to figure itself out. Some residents left, those who'd moved in for the uniformity and lawn compliance. Others stayed, happier to repaint their mailboxes whatever damn color they wanted. The clubhouse was repurposed into a community tool shed. The golf cart patrols were gone. A few former board members even reached out to apologize. Awkward, but sincere. Tim, the one who flipped early, offered to help fix my roof as a gesture. I told him I appreciated the offer but preferred to do it myself. Some scars aren't meant to be patched by the people who made them. Julia's coalition lawsuit moved forward like a freight train. By the end of the year, they had over 30 plaintiffs from 3 counties. She was on the news twice, gave a TEDx talk about property rights and weaponized bureaucracy, and was invited to testify before a state housing subcommittee. She asked if I wanted to come with her to Atlanta for the hearing. No, I told her, but I'll write something if you want to read it out loud. I did. She did. They listened. One senator came up to her afterward and said, "Why haven't we heard stories like this before?" She smiled. "Because most people don't win." That stuck with me. I thought a lot about winning in the months that followed, what it meant, what it cost. My shed still bore fire stains on the foundation. My savings had taken a hit. Legal fees, repairs, surveillance equipment. Bo was 10 now. He limped a little more when the mornings were cold, but I'd won. I'd stood between a machine and my home, and I hadn't blinked. Most people don't win, not because they don't fight, but because they get exhausted, because the machine grinds them down and nobody notices. Because the HOA board's threat of daily fines sounds more real than the quiet promise of, "You don't have to take this." But I knew the law, I had evidence, I had help, and now other people did too. The anti-annexation initiative went national. Julie and a few others built a network, pro bono attorneys, zoning consultants, legal templates for homeowners. Someone launched a website. There was even talk of a documentary. A Netflix producer called me. I hung up, politely. One afternoon, a young couple stopped by. She was 7 months pregnant. He looked like he'd just come off a double shift. They said they'd bought land 2 miles down the road, and someone told them I was the guy to talk to about HOAs. Not a lawyer, I said. We know, the husband replied. We just want to understand how to not get screwed. So I walked them through it. What to look for in deeds, how to verify zoning overlays, how to spot red flags in development covenants. I sent them off with copies of documents, a checklist, and a phone number for Julia's firm. They offered me money. I refused. But after they left, I added a bench near the fence with a small sign above it that said, "Consultation free, bring coffee." The mailbox filled with letters again, but this time they came with return addresses. Some were thank yous. Others were horror stories. One was a handwritten invitation to speak at a community picnic. I didn't go, but I kept the note. One night, I stood out under the stars, hands in my jacket, watching Bo sniff around the old oak near the west side. The land was still, untamed, beautiful in its refusal to be anything but what it was. I had no intention of leaving, ever. I hadn't just saved my home. I'd reclaimed something deeper, the right to say no, to stand still while the rest of the world tried to push you forward with paper and threats and polished sales language. And maybe, just maybe, I'd lit a small fire of my own. Not one that burned down buildings, but one that burned in people's minds. A fire that said, you can fight back, you're not alone, and sometimes the bastard doesn't win.